Hello again, and welcome to the Gospel of Mark. We have finished now 12 of the 26 or 39 episodes of Mark, and we're so glad that you're joining us and hopefully enjoying our program. We're on chapter 5, and I'd like to begin by letting you know our guests are our usual stars, Father Mike Lastiri, who is the pastor of Immaculate Heart of Mary Parish in Hanford, and also across from me is Dr. Robert Maldonado, who is a professor at California State University, Fresno, and is, like Father Mike, most inclined to study and enjoy teaching and studying the Gospel of Mark. We hope you're catching that flavor from us, because now in chapter 5, it gets more and more interesting verse by verse. Could we begin, Robert, with 5:1?
They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when he had come out of the boat, there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him any more, even with a chain. For he had often been bound with fetters and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the fetters he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains he was always crying out and bruising himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshipped him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him eagerly not to send them out of the country.
And now a great herd of swine let us enter him. So he gave them leave, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine. And the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea, and were drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country, and people came to see what was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demoniac sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the man who had had the legion. And they were afraid. And those who had seen it told what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their neighborhood. And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with them. But he refused, and said to him, "Go home to your friends. Tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And all men marveled.
We have here such a powerful story that we are going to spend the next half hour, hopefully, even if it's just scratching the surface. There's going to be more things that we may miss, but we'll try to show you, I hope, the depth of this story, especially through Mark's perspective. So why don't we begin with Robert, who might want to unpack for us the main part that he would find truly giving us a mark and direction to this powerful work of Jesus, and perhaps showing us how it fits into the gospel and why in chapter 5 it actually is a perfect fit. Robert.
Well, again, we're continuing sort of Jesus' acts of power in chapter 5. This passage actually puzzles a lot of scholars, because the country of the Gerasenes is quite a ways away from the water. And so trying to actually locate this has been kind of difficult in terms of what Mark may be doing with it, how it may have been remembered in the earlier tradition. And I think that's an important point, is that Mark is inheriting stories that have been stories for people before Mark uses them. At this point in the narrative, Mark has Jesus going back and forth several times across the sea, moving between Gentile territory and Jewish territory. and he does various things on both sides of the water. But one of the things that he does, as he's going to do in this story, is an exorcism. And so this is kind of paralleled to the exorcism in chapter 9 in the synagogue. And so I think Mark, in part, is doing a kind of symbolic cleansing of the world, both Jewish and Gentile worlds, by having Jesus moving back and forth between these two sort of geographic spaces in Mark.
Father Mike, when you are knowing that it's your turn to preach on this gospel, it won't be on a Sunday with the Markan text, but often it'll be, because it's a parallel text, you'll get it in Matthew or in Luke. But when it comes to this text of this healing, what is maybe something you want us to see for the importance of this text as a scripture reading, as a lectionary piece in our lectionary?
Well, for the preacher and certainly for the hearer, first of all, the power of Jesus. The power of Jesus to, if you will, interject into this, as mentioned before, a very confusing scene. This man who is possessed. Also the symbolic use, the swine, the sea. Again, the problematic of location, but I think for a preacher, it can be certainly seen as water and its power. For us, sacramental power of water, also the whole sense of life and death that is found in water. I find all of these elements. So when one is preaching and then one is trying to talk about Jesus in the modern world, certainly this gospel kind of gives us an impression that Jesus does and can come through, if you will, the difficulties of the world, if you will, and then bring that power and that force. But also to use all those other elements to talk about life and to talk about death and to talk about escape and to talk about renewal and to talk about how we can be healed of the many things that, as we know more and more today, not only physical, spiritual, emotional brokenness, and how the spiritual strength can come for all of these things, certainly on the surface. And of course, if we need to do more, we can go much deeper even to the sense of the lake. I think, as Robert mentioned before, if you were to look at the historical data or the geographical data, there is that separation. But if you want to use it in a spiritual sense, the whole sense of water being healing, and for a sacramental people, baptism is one of those images of healing, restoring, especially as during the Easter season we concentrate so much on the baptismal call of people.
Robert, if we could, we've got 20 lines we want to really unpack. Certain words came to me early in the text. This idea of tombs, it mentions it twice at least, and then it also tells me, Jim, go to Isaiah 65, you'll see tombs. What's the big deal with the fact that tombs is right there?
Well, I mean, clearly the tombs are a place of the dead, and the man is out amongst the tombs. He's been chained. They've tried to subdue him, but he can't be subdued, and he's also harming himself. So he's doing things to himself. I think it's also important. The tomb location is also related to in a very important sense. The man isn't even really there. He's possessed. I mean, one of the things when you're possessed, you have no faculties, right? You are not in any control of anything. And so the man actually doesn't even really emerge as a person until the healing happens, until the exorcism happens, and he's in his right mind, clothed. So I see that kind of dynamic happening. Exorcisms are one of the very few miracle stories that Jesus takes initiative on. Usually companions or the person themselves have to come to Jesus and say, heal me or help or whatever. And that makes some sense because exorcisms are unique in that the person is possessed. They have no ability to request a miracle. And even this one is kind of strange in terms of we don't know the verb that was translated the demons worship Jesus simply means kneel. knelt before him. So it could mean, it certainly could mean worship, but it could also simply mean some kind of acknowledgement of respect or power. So the demon is not even sort of requesting anything clear other than that it doesn't want to be tortured.
That's where I'm going now. It says, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." What's the importance, either one of you, this is 10 points, this question, the using that high church vocabulary, Son of the Most High God, why is that in the text so early? And do not torment me. What is he worried about? And yet, why does he run? It's almost like, I'm running to you, help me, Father Mike, don't touch me. What's the deal here?
Well, I think in so many ways, again, as Mark is dealing with good and evil, and certainly, we see exorcism as the possession by the evil one, but yet there is that sense that the evil one is a created being, that whole sense that God has the power over evil as well, and so that the demon even can recognize, if you will, that this is much more powerful than him or they. However, if we use that as we go on to later on with the Legion, that whole sense that that the God, the Jesus, the Son of the Most High, and certainly language which probably came in much later on in usage and understanding, just makes that point that they recognized who he was, and almost pleading, don't hurt us, if you will. And so out of fear of what Jesus could do and will do.
Legion, is it too soon to work with this? Because the note reminds me there was the Roman legion that was a fearsome, awesome, evil empire. Robert, where does that fit into the dynamic?
Well, I want to come to that, but one important thing for Mark too on this Son of the Most High God is that in Mark, the people, the characters in the story that you would expect to get the story of Jesus typically don't. We've made this point before, and those that you would think wouldn't necessarily get it do. And so the disciples, the family of Jesus, are sort of on the outside, and the crowd, and now the demons, right? There's actually very few characters that seem to self-consciously know that Jesus is the Son of God, and the demons clearly are ones that you might think no, because they are spiritual of some kind. They live in that realm, but on another sense, the fact that it does have this kind of kneeling, worship, confession kind of quality to it is pretty extraordinary that the demons do that. And yes, I think the Legion is amazing.
Let's hold the Legion, because we want to hold you to say, oh, I can't wait to hear about the Roman Legion. We'll do that after the break, so stay tuned. We'll be right back in 1 minute. Welcome back to the Gospel of Mark. We're in the middle of chapter 5. We're having Dr. Robert Maldonado and Father Mike Lastiri unpack the story of the Gerasene demoniac. Robert, this Legion thing, tell us about the Roman army a little bit, about Palestine, about the occupation, about why that Legion might be something about the evil army.
Well, obviously the name is there, and so their name is Legion, for we are many. I think as part of Mark's sort of, or maybe prior to Mark, the sort of making this story symbolic, and it's actually related to the pigs too. A Roman legion was typically made up of between 1,000 and 2,000 men. And of course, I think it was the 10th Legion, I'm actually not sure if that was present there. And their standard was the boar. And also pigs are sacred to Zeus in this time. And so there's a kind of Zeus Roman religion critique probably going on as well. It was Antiochus IV, centuries before, who sacrificed a pig on the altar in the temple, and created quite a terrible circumstance. in Israel, and so Antiochus may not have known that pigs were particularly inappropriate for being sacrificed on a Jewish altar because of Zeus, and so there's probably even allusions to that story, because that story is going to come back in Mark 13 from Daniel. And there's 2,000 pigs, so you get that. And then the other thing that's really important about the pigs is to sort of ask the question, is what these pigs do sort of normal pig behavior? And of course, and of course you could always say, well, they're not normal because they're possessed by demons or whatever. But when you sort of read the story, I'm not a pig expert. I just play one on television, but pigs apparently don't do much of what these pigs are described as doing in general. When the pigs are first introduced, they're described as grazing is actually the word, and of course pigs are don't graze on the hillside. Pigs also don't stampede. They scatter when they're startled, and pigs are also very good swimmers. And so the fact that these pigs don't do the normal thing, I think, is really kind of important, because it continues to maintain that Roman association. Because what is Rome doing in Israel? They are grazing, right? They're occupying, they're subduing the people. The man becomes kind of like Israel. They keep trying to chain him, but Israel keeps not letting this foreign imperial oppression sort of keep them down. It is still God's country, but they're still harming themselves. It's a terrible thing. And then in a kind of mockery of the Roman legion, because what was famous about the Roman legion was marching in rank and file. And so in a sense, what the pigs demons do is they march like the legion, ironically, to their destruction in the water, and Jesus casts out that evil.
What's so fascinating is to begin with a word legion and then throw in the word pig, and think that we're going to hear something easy like, there were a lot of them, and Jews, a pig, it's a very filthy animal. It's unclean. It breaks all rules of kosher. That would be the easy way to go in. But Robert, what you do is you bring up all these deep observations about reality at the time, deep social issues. How much of that are you thinking in the mind of the people? Are they appreciating in Mark's narrative? And Father Mike, also jump in. Are you finding that this way Robert analyzes the whole thing, when did that become clear to people that these are the things we're talking about? Jesus' ability to conquer all forms of evil, be it a possession, but be it an oppression, be it the need for liberation from foreign control. How much of this plays in the reader, I'm wondering?
Well, and first of all, being a farm boy, I want to affirm everything you said. You're very correct on all the criticisms and the attributes of pigs. But the problem with a text like this in the modern era is that you really, the reading of it, the proclaiming of it, is difficult for the person today who does not have any of this background in either history or apocalyptic literature or in so many other ways, that this was real at the time it was written. So much like the book of Revelation, another veiled, book. And so I think it happens is all of these things escape people unless we bring it to their attention, all the other realities. So when people look at a text like this, they do see, and they can acknowledge the power of Jesus. They can acknowledge that he was acknowledged as God by the demons. But when they look at this story, they're not necessarily seeing all of the material that's been brought up to this point, because we don't live in an agrarian society. We are more urban. Also, this whole idea of history, apocalyptic literature. So therefore, all this escapes, and I think to unpack this material in today's world is so important. Otherwise, it's a story that gets ignored because, well, we don't understand it, or we make presumptions, assumptions, all those kinds of things. And I think it can be very difficult for people. And so, of course, what you don't understand, you simply ignore and just hope it goes away.
These are the stories that make you really, really spend all the time you can with Mark. It's unbelievably rich unpacking.
Yeah. And even the demons, beg Jesus not to send them out of the country. It's the strangest line. But when you see the kind of political Roman dimensions to it, it's part of the irony, right? Here's this powerful empire who is begging Jesus because they know he has power not to send them out of the country. They don't want to leave the country because they want to continue to extract what they can extract from the occupied land. And then, of course, the irony of then begging to go into the pigs, which then results in their destruction, is even more. You also get the kind of strange reaction of the people. They want Jesus to leave. They're upset. But that makes sense too in the political context because they are people who have made an accommodation to Rome's presence. And people who accommodate oppressors do not want people running around in their right minds, because the people in their right minds can see and understand how oppression works, and will do something, and usually things will get bad before they get better, right? And so, because oppressors tend to respond with power when their power is questioned.
I also think that this kind of reading, when you begin to unpack it, can be very disturbing to modern people today, especially if you do belong to a country or to a place that tends to also, in the same way, be more powerful than others. So when you're talking about power structure, it tends to kind of put everybody a little bit off balance because you begin to think yourself, wow. And I really want to affirm that last point, the collaborators, if you will. Nobody likes to rock the boat, because when you rock the boat, you don't know what might come. And so it's very easy to stand by and just, well, it's worked so far, leave it alone. And yet there are social justice issues, or just simply because it's not enough to leave it alone. So it does, it will, it should cause us to think.
I can't believe Father Mike gave the perfect segue to verse 18, which is we're closing our little commentary on this show. And as he was getting into the boat, Father Mike said, "You shouldn't rock the boat, Jim." The man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him, but he refused. "Go home, tell your friends how much the Lord has done for you and how he's had mercy with you." Robert, we've seen over and over this messianic secret being revealed in small doses. Don't tell anybody, please, shut up, don't tell anybody. This time, he tells them, tell your friends. What's the deal here?
I think there's at least two things going on. One is it is the friends, and the other thing is that it is this coded story, right? This is a code, in a sense, right, with the Roman associations. And so it's still part of the secret, right? You tell a coded story because you don't want the Romans to know what you're talking about. The other thing that's quite interesting, too, is this man really is in his right mind from a Markan perspective, because what it says is Jesus tells him to go tell what the Lord has done for you, which is, in its initial reference, God, right? Go tell how much God has done. And then what the man does is he goes and tells how much Jesus has done, right? And so from the sort of the way Mark has presented the character, the man is now identifying Jesus as God, right? It starts with the demons doing it, but the man is doing it now. And so that's quite a unique movement in Mark.
In that little line, it moves from, like you say, it's verse 19 that has the Lord mentioned, Jesus asking him to proclaim the Lord, and the man flips it and says he proclaimed into capitalists how much Jesus. So within one line, within one verse, Mark accomplishes a major, major coup. Father Mike, what would be one thing that you think that a congregation needs to hear, despite all the details? What's one thing they can't miss about the story of this demoniac? What is one thing you want to share with us today that it's just the overriding thing that we've really got to comprehend about this story?
Well, I think going back to what I said earlier is Jesus dealt with the issues of his time, and he did it boldly. And even again in verse 20, when he says to proclaim, and they went away proclaiming, and all men marveled. And I think when all men marvel, they marvel at someone who spoke the truth. And speaking the truth has its risk, oftentimes has its consequences, and there was a consequence for Jesus. But they marveled. And I think we must marvel whenever we hear truth.
Final thought, Robert, as we close.
Well, again, I think the political dimensions are really interesting. Also, in terms of just the story, you brought it up. Who would have understood all of these things? It's set in a Gentile region. If it emerged from that region, I presume people would have had some knowledge of pig behavior. And certainly in non-Gentile and Jewish contexts, it might be a fun story to tell too, just in terms of this significant cash crop has been destroyed, and it should not have been a cash crop in the first place, or something like that. So it's just a wonderful story.
It is a phenomenal story, and I hope you're appreciating how much fun we are having taking 20 verses, finding them integral, finding them packed with so much. We really did only scratch the surface. If we had had more time, we could have unpacked even more. But we hope that was a good beginning. And when we're back next time, I hope you'll be there with your scriptures in hand, able to appreciate the power of the Gospel of Mark. God bless.